was a period in early 2020 where probably the most recognisable face on 7 News wasn't any of the reporters or anchors, but Shane Fitzsimmons. He was unfortunately on 7 News a lot, as well as all the other bulletins and papers across the country under very trying circumstances. He was the RFS Commissioner for New South Wales during the black summer of 2019-2020, the bushfires that devastated much of the east coast of Australia and beyond, as many of us are aware. He really did become the voice and the face relaying to us what was happening as the catastrophe unfolded around our communities and our country. Shane was honoured as 2021 New South Wales Australian of the Year. And we know that he is all in for a good cause, but he has really committed himself to the NEBA good cause today because he turned down an invitation to have tea with King Charles so he could be here. I had to double check that it was in my MC notes. And I thought, hang on, really? Not that I don't want to be here with you, but that's a pretty big invitation. But he really did. And we are absolutely delighted to have him talk to us today about everything he's learnt about resilience and finding new ways to build back better. If you could please join me in welcoming Shane Fitzsimmons to the stage. Thank you.
Up to 30 properties have been wiped out around the town of Rappville.
An emergency warning has been issued for a bushfire burning out of control at Lake Innes.
To the developing fire emergency in New South Wales, 14 emergency warnings are now in place.
There are more than 150 fires burning across the state. 80 of those, we're told now, are out of control.
The bushfire emergency gripping our state is heading into uncharted territory. A catastrophic fire danger warning has been issued for the Hunter region and for the first time in history for Greater Sydney.
Two young families and the entire rural fire service are mourning the tragic deaths of two fathers who dedicated their lives to helping their community.
If there is a definition of hero, it's those two young men that put their own safety on the line to go out and save others.
Friends and family of fallen firefighter Jeffrey Keaton have gathered in Sydney's West for his funeral this morning.
I present to the family a Commissioner's Commendation for Extraordinary Service and a Commissioner's Commendation for Bravery.
The daughter of fallen volunteer firefighter Andrew O'Dwyer staying close to her beloved dad's coffin throughout his funeral service at Horsley Park.
For baby Charlotte, you need to know that your dad was a selfless man. He was a special man. And he only left us because he was a hero.
A brave volunteer gave his wife a hug and kissed his unborn baby before going out to fight the fire that would claim his life.
The heartbroken widow of a bushfire hero has received her husband's Bravery Award.
Thank you for everything. Rest in peace, Sam.
They gave everything, more than boots and all, their lives. Captain Ian Macbeth, First Officer Paul Hudson, and Flight Engineer Rick DeMorgan Jr., 3 Americans killed defending Australians. Their firefighting Hercules crashing near the Snowy Mountains last week.
They loved flying, they loved their families, and they loved helping people.
They died as heroes. Selfless individuals paying the ultimate price while simply serving and protecting others. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It's a privilege to be with you here for the NEBA conference. That season was certainly beyond our status quo on so many levels. It was an unparalleled fire season, and whilst I've got an obvious New South Wales lens, we knew these fires cause extensive damage and destruction through Queensland, New South Wales, ACT, Victoria, South Australia. It was extensive through the southeastern area of Australia. Unparalleled because we were on the back end of a drought, the hottest and driest period on record at the time. From a fire practitioner's point of view, the only good thing about a drought is in New South Wales, everything west of the Great Dividing Range was fire risk free because there was nothing to burn. But the concentration of risk centred around the Great Dividing Range and all the way out to the coast, and the forecast for that season was almost identical to the forecast the previous season. As a matter of fact, the forecast the previous season had more geographic coverage of being at risk of above normal fire season. The difference was the weather didn't materialise in 1819, but it sure did in 1920. The most compelling stats in here are summarised, but I take you to the note of 160 consecutive days of high-intensity operations and over 200 days of local bushfire emergency declarations, consecutive days. We've simply never seen anything like that in the nation's history. We see bad seasons, we see episodic weather events, we see the intensity of firefighting operations that might typically last 5 days, 7 days, 10 days, and then we get a reprieve as the weather fronts move across the country, give us some easing conditions, allow us to get the upper hand, and then we'll go into another weather cycle. 160 days was unparalleled. The damage and destruction for us in New South Wales was unparalleled. Just under 2,500 homes destroyed, but importantly, the firefighting efforts of firefighters, emergency services and community members in the same burn scar area saved over 15,000 homes. The damage, Cole, could have been considerably more. Of course, for us, it was also loss of life. We lost 26 people during that fire season as a direct result of the fires, including 7 of our firefighters. It wasn't the nation's most deadly fire season. Sadly, that was Victoria back in 2009 in February, when essentially in one afternoon a handful of fires burnt across the Victorian landscape and killed 173 people. But for us, this was the worst we'd seen in terms of a fire event. 7 firefighters, Jeff and Andrew, as they were in that video clip there, southwest of Sydney, driving down to save another community, protect another community. A burnt tree fell across the road through the front windscreen, killing Jeff and Andrew in the front seat of the truck. Their truck came to settle some time later, and we forget that there were crew members in the back seat of that truck that were able to get out of the vehicle after it landed on its side many tens of metres down the road and escape with relatively minor injuries. On the 30th of December, we lost young Sam down near the Victorian border. And another interesting phenomenon of that fire season was we had a record number of pyroconvective columns that were formed above firegrounds. They're commonly referred to as fire-generated thunderstorms. Characteristic of those thunderstorms is you get very volatile weather in and around the fireground, and it's an extraordinary energy source. On one side of the fireground, you might find localised lightning strikes and new ignitions and very volatile winds. On the other side of the fireground, you could see weather being quite benign. And on this particular fire that Sam was on, there was an extraordinary tornado-like event that developed in and around what was a benign side of the fireground. The wind strengths were so strong, the volunteers described it like suddenly being in peaceful, calm settings to be enveloped by cyclonic type winds. Those winds were so strong that the truck that Sam was working on, 12, 13 tonne truck, he was on the back of it mopping up, and the winds came in, flipped the truck up, inverted it, and it landed on its roof. A few hundred metres away, other vehicles are rolled over. But another characteristic of this extraordinary fire tornado that came through was that it was full of heat and flames and fire. So we had extensive burn injuries as well to crew members that sought refuge in the Murray River. fire-generated thunderstorms, we saw more in this fire season than we have for all the records of fire-generated thunderstorms since the 1980s in New South Wales. It was an extraordinary period of time. On the 31st of December, we lost another volunteer, Cole, down in the high country, down in the Southern Ranges, where he worked with his fellow firefighters to get people back to the local fire shed in the area where they could best afford safety, safe protection. Sadly, Cole never made it back. They believe he lost visibility, crashed into the side of the embankment, rolled his vehicle, and they found his burnt out remains later that day when the fire conditions had eased. And then, of course, we didn't think it'd get any worse, and on the 23rd of January, our Bomber 134, our large air tanker, one of 5, which was a record for the country at the time that we had operating here in New South Wales, crashed down in the high country. They jettisoned a load. They were never able to get back out of that and climb out, and sadly the plane crashed into the ground and burst into flames, killing all 3 on board. Ian, Paul and Rick were killed in that impact. So it was an extraordinary period of time, and certainly something we'd never seen before. We finally welcomed some rain in February, and people were rejoicing literally everywhere. You won't find me referring to it as Black Summer bushfires. I think it does a disservice to too many people that were battling fires all the way through winter. We were averaging over 1,000 fires a month during winter, and then it simply increased to 1,800, 1,900, over 2,000 as we moved in towards Christmas, and then it eased off in January a little bit, and then effectively all fires were declared out in February once we got the welcome relief. The problem was it didn't stop bloody raining then for about 3 years, and right across the state we saw extensive widespread damage for individuals, for families, for businesses, small, medium and large, infrastructure, etc., etc. Some of the statistics are pretty extraordinary. I can talk about the fires, but when you talk about some of these floods, nearly double what was uninhabitable during the fires became uninhabitable in floods. The support and assistance measures and programs that were being offered by governments were just record-breaking. Just these 5 events alone, we coordinated between the Commonwealth and state government in New South Wales alone over $10 billion of support and assistance measures. It was quite extraordinary, something we've never seen before. And interestingly, working very closely with colleagues in the insurance sector, particularly through the ICA, we were co-communicating with those who were impacted and affected about what they needed to do, how they needed to do it, and how they could best effect sensible and streamlined claims, because we were suddenly rushing in with at-scale clean-up and wash-out and removal of all sorts of things that are damaged and soiled, and people were particularly concerned about they would be in breach of their obligations to demonstrate damage and what have you. And so we had to work very closely to get all these things effectively synergised. What's also quite concerning is that at the time that I left government, towards the end of 2022, we had, since the 1920 bushfires through to November 22, something like 639 local government natural disaster declarations in New South Wales. 639. We've only got 128 local governments in the state. We also look after the far west, the unincorporated zone, and we also look after Lord Howe Island. So that's 130 areas. In that 4-year period, every single one of those areas have been declared a natural disaster at least once. At the time, more than 70 of them had been declared natural disasters 5 times or more, and we had 6 of them, I think it was 6 or 7 at that time, that had been declared natural disasters 10 times or more. So you're talking about an extraordinary compounding effect of disaster after disaster after disaster. And I know people in this room, like me, when you talk to people and they are literally rebuilding their lives, rebuilding their homes, rebuilding their properties, rebuilding their businesses following the fires in 1920, and then by the time they hit 2021, particularly on the mid-north coast, to have extraordinary flood events come through and literally wash away what they've rebuilt or what they're in the process of rebuilding is pretty debilitating. But one of the other concerning elements of those natural disaster declarations is that you will probably know that in this context, natural disaster declarations only relate to bushfires, floods, and storms. During this period, as I said, we had communities on their knees with drought. They were then absolutely belted by bushfires. We saw extensive flooding and floods and storm events year after year after year on the back of those rain events, the weather pattern finally changing. I should also mention we experienced one of the worst mouse plagues in decades throughout large areas of regional New South Wales in this same period. We saw an exponential growth in cyber activity and cyber crime impacting individuals, families, businesses, small, medium, large, local governments at all levels, local, state and Commonwealth. We saw repeated displacement and damage to critical infrastructure, everything from power, telecommunications, transport corridors, and the basic elements of utilities around power, sewage and water and all those sorts of things that connect into homes. A lot of people didn't realise we're also dealing with a considerable number of biosecurity disease outbreaks. I think there was 7 running at the time during this period. And of course, the blessed COVID-19 pandemic that really set in earnest in about April or May of 2020, just after we saw reprieve from the fires. So we are talking about a period of time that when I talk to people and look at the record books, no one can find a parallel in terms of displacement, damage, despair, tragedy on such a concentrated period of time over such a significant geographic footprint. And whilst traditionally events and disasters happen, they happen somewhere to some community. And we do see this wonderful outpouring of love and support and compassion and generosity. And we all tend to go back on with our busy lives at some stage. And it's those that are directly affected by the event that need to endure the relief and the recovery and the rebuilding and the healing. But I think COVID was a leveller for all of us, where it didn't matter who we were, what we were, or where we were in society. We were all subject to so much beyond our control, deprived of our capacity to think and do for ourselves as we responded to and complied with all that was being asked of us to do our best in the global pandemic situation. I'm often asked, what is it that keeps people going and keeps teams going and keeps communities going, and what is it that we do to support people in these times? Well, to me, it's leadership. And leadership is not the purview of the people at the top of the organisation. To me, leadership is about building culture. Leadership is fundamentally about building relationships of trust and confidence. You are all in the business of building relationships. People are connecting with you, they're seeking you out, they're wanting your advice on guidance, they're putting their trust in you to put in place what they believe and what you advise is the best for them in anticipation of dealing with and getting out the other side of these sorts of challenges going forward. So that trust and confidence relationship centres around, in my view, a range of core leadership fundamental elements. I think it's fundamentally an individual and collective responsibility for all of us that we exercise leadership. And to me, it centres around half a dozen key attributes that starts with self, the person we have a conversation with in the mirror, those we work with and connect with, our colleagues, our team members. We forget often those who we report to in the system, but of course, our customers and our community. When it comes to authenticity, there's nothing that trumps, in my view, authenticity. If we can be honest, if we can be clear, if we can do that with self and with others, we build very strong relationships of trust and confidence. Our integrity genuinely matters. If we are perceived to be misleading people, underappreciating or over-exaggerating circumstances, we breach that trust and confidence relationship. Humility and empathy. We've always got to remember as leaders, no matter who we are leaders amongst equals. No one is more important or more special than anybody else. Take what we do very seriously, but don't take ourselves too seriously. And spend as much time as we can properly understanding who we are connecting with, who are we relying on, and who are we seeking to serve and support in the delivery of our services. The more we can genuinely understand our colleagues, our teammates, our teams we're responsible for, those we report to, and those we are providing services to, products and services to, the better chance we've got of forming that connection and recognising that we're all equal in the equation. I like to coin the phrase, we are leaders amongst equals. None of us are any better or different than anybody else. We all recognise, though, that we've got different roles and functions to perform, and everybody respects that. Decisions and actions are critical. We know the biggest demotivators in workplaces and team environments are the indecision of management and leadership, or the inaction of poor performance, poor behaviour, poor attitudes, unwelcome behaviours in the workplace, and we must all call it out. We must centre ourselves and do the right things, but we must call it out when it's wrong, and we must make decisions. People are invariably happy with decisions we take that they don't support than no decision at all. And good leaders will make decisions based on the best intel and input they can get around them, and they will explain the reason for the decision and the intent of the decision, what we're hoping to try and achieve and secure. Communication is fundamental. Who are we communicating with? Be really clear about what we know, what we don't know, what we're doing, why we're doing it, what we're not doing, why we can't do that, and most importantly, what do we want others to do to be part of that equation. Mutual respect for me is fundamentally around, in this context, the need to maintain civility. We see too many examples where leaders have lost the art of debate, have lost the art of argument, which is so critical in anything we do. But if we can properly understand and exercise our manners, a phrase I grew up with, manners cost you nothing, but the lack of them can cost you everything. And when we're engaging with colleagues, when we're engaging with customers, if we lose that civility, if we become too authoritative, dictatorial, dogmatic, we're going to breach that trust and confidence space. And of course, the word care. Care is not used enough in leadership and culture. And my simple message to anybody in any role, volunteer or salaried, is if you don't care about what you're a part of, then my message is, why are you there? You're better off leaving where you are and going somewhere else where you think you might care, because all you're doing is bringing everyone down if you're not caring about what you do, the role you have, and those that you connect with and rely on. Which brings me to the final element around resilience. I remember being asked to head up this organisation called Resilience, but when I was first asked to do it, it was going to be called Disaster Recovery and Emergency Management. And as a simple person, I understood that. And then when they decided to put this word resilience in, I said to them, what the bloody hell's resilience? No one understands what that is. And they told me to calm down and embrace it, which I did, kind of. I remember seriously thinking to myself, what is this word resilience? And then I tried to, with all objectivity, ask myself what it meant. And then I spent a lot of time talking to others, getting around the state, particularly those that have been displaced and affected by big events. And then I could in all conscience say we've never been through a period of time, in my reckoning, where we've used the word resilience so much. Family conversations, workplaces, mainstream media, politicians, you name it, it's everywhere. And then I started thinking, crikey, is this like that word we were all introduced to in the 90s when if you really couldn't articulate what you were saying, you just threw the word strategic in and everyone thought you were clever and on point and on message. But as I travelled around, I learnt what resilience is not. The common definition is the ability to bounce back to normal after big disruption or displacement, words to that effect. Well, I call BS on that, because what is normal, we don't know. And why would anyone want to go back to that state and be just as vulnerable all over again to disruption or displacement? So to me, resilience is about learning through life experiences, learning through lived experiences, so we come out the other side of events stronger, wiser, more able to anticipate, hopefully mitigate and reduce the likelihood going forward. And if it does occur, be better placed emotionally and physically as self and as infrastructure and so on. But it's very hard to to challenge, it's very hard to process resilience when you're reminded of the enormity of loss. And you guys are connecting with people all the time in this area. Behind every statistic, behind every pile of rubble, behind every clean out, behind every disruption, there is people. There is a human. When we talk about reconstruction, when we talk about recovery, we talk about reconstruction, repair, renewal, rebuilding. We don't always talk about the word healing. And I'm very mindful of the extraordinary work that our brokers have done right across the country, not just in your day-to-day work, but when I talk to Gary and Richard, I'm reminded of the volunteering ethos that you have, where you pick up the phone and you connect and you're guiding people through, difficult times, challenging times, whether they're customers or not. That's admirable. That's a sign of helping people through these difficult times and helping them through healing. The material elements matter, but the human connection truly matters. And I'll just conclude by saying, no matter who we are or what we are in exercising our leadership, I used to read this book to my daughters when they were little, and I'm sure it's a good book about children understanding volume or mass or something like that. But it's a story. But for me, it's a great leadership piece of literature. If you want to improve leadership skills, I encourage you to go and buy it. It's an easy read. There's only a dozen words per page, and it's well illustrated. But it's this story about a cow, a donkey, a sheep, and a pig and a mouse, and they all get in this little boat one at a time. And as you're taking through your kids on their little journey, the question on every page is, do you know who sank the boat? Did such and such sink the boat? Spoiler alert if you're going to go and buy it. Right at the very end, it's the mouse that hops in. It's the mouse that hops in the boat and tips the boat over. And I think the salient leadership lesson in that regard is that it's the little things we do that truly matter. And it's the little things we do, both negatively and positively, that can have extraordinary ripple effects. We need to maintain the focus on doing the little things and doing the little things right, and avoid doing those little things wrong. Because if we're going to continue to build relationships of trust and confidence, you are in the business of building relationships of trust and confidence. We've already seen extraordinary events beyond anything we've seen before, and with the forecasts ahead, globally, we can expect that to continue into the future. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.